Welcome to the Ecotechie. In today's video, we are going to learn one of the classic laws in economics. This law is the basis of law of demand and it was given by Professor Alfred Marshall, which is none other than the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, what exactly is this law of diminishing marginal utility? According to Professor Alfred Marshall, the additional benefit a person derives from a given increase of a stock of a thing diminishes with every increase in the stock that he already has. This may sound a bit difficult at the beginning, but let's break down this law and understand it in much more detail. Now, let us suppose that we are performing a thought experiment. Let us suppose that we are walking on the street and we are very hungry. We find a cake shop. We go to the cake shop and we buy a piece of cake. After having a piece of cake, we feel nice and we feel better than before. Now, let us assume that we are going to give a total utility of 10 to this first piece of cake. It's cake, so we want to have more of cake, so we are going to buy another piece of cake. After having two pieces of cake, our total utility has increased to 18. And we go on buying the third piece of cake. After buying the third piece of cake, the total utility increases to 24. And we buy the fourth piece of cake. After buying the fourth piece of cake, the total utility has risen to 27. And we buy the fifth piece of cake. But at the fifth piece of cake, you are completely full. You don't want anything else. And hence, the total utility that has been derived from the fourth piece of cake and the fifth piece of cake is going to be the same. But in such a scenario, if you have offered another piece of cake, what would happen? That is, if you are offered the sixth piece of cake, then you would feel really unwell. You would start puking. You would start hating cake as a whole. And then what happens? The total utility falls. So from a 27, it falls back to 24. So over here, we see a pattern. Now, this was total utility. That is the utility that you get from having all the products. Now, over here, we are interested in something known as marginal utility. Marginal utility is nothing but the utility derived from the last piece of cake. So, when we are having the first piece of cake, the total utility and the marginal utility is going to be 10. When we have having two pieces of cake, the total utility has increased from 10 to 18. So, what would be the marginal utility? How much has it increased? It has increased by 8 points. Similarly, for the case of third piece of cake, how much utility is the third piece of cake adding? It is nothing but 24 minus 18, which is 6. Similarly, the difference between the fourth piece of cake and the third piece of cake is nothing but 3. But the marginal utility derived from the fifth piece of cake is going to be 0 because after having the fourth piece of cake and the fifth piece of cake, your total utility is 0. So 27 minus 27 is going to be 0. And in the sixth piece of cake, what happens? You are having the sixth cake, you have started puking, you feel unwell, and your marginal utility has decreased to 3. So, over here you see a pattern. You see that as the number of cakes increase, marginal utility goes on decreasing. So over here, Alfred Marshall wants to say that when you go on consuming one more unit, the marginal utility goes on diminishing. Now, let us plot this into a graph. Let's see how this looks after plotting. So, on the x-axis, we have the number of cakes that we are going to have, and on the y-axis, we are having the utility. So we are going to plot, after having the first cake, we got a total utility of 10, and after having the second cake, the total utility increased to an 18, and after having the third cake, the total utility increased to 24, and after having the fourth cake, the total utility increased to 27, and after having the fifth cake, there was no change in the total utility, so it remains same at 27. And if we have the sixth cake, our total utility will fall down to 24. This is nothing but the total utility curve. So as the number of product increases, total utility increases, but only up to a certain point, or it increases at a very diminishing rate. Now let us point the marginal utility. So when we are having one cake, our marginal utility is 10. When we have two cakes, the marginal utility has dropped down to 8, because at the first cake you were really hungry and you wanted to eat something. So the utility or the marginal utility derived is going to be high over there. After having the third cake, the marginal utility falls further. Similarly for the fourth case. And in the fifth case, the marginal utility is at 0. And if we have the sixth cake, the marginal utility goes into the negative area. Once we join all these points, we get something known as the marginal utility curve. So this curve helps us understand how the total utility increases at a diminishing rate. And as you increase the number of cakes, your marginal utility keeps on diminishing. Over here, there is a point of satiety. Now, what is this point of satiety? Over here, your marginal utility is 0 and your total utility is at the highest, or it's the maximum. So I hope the idea of law of diminishing marginal utility, the utility schedules, and how to plot the graph is clear for one and all. Do like, share and subscribe to the Ecotechie. If you have any comments, kindly post it in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.